individual that was going to build the stairs had already started, because it was a stair and a porch, had already started, under the assumption that they could do it because the person was handicapped. And we said then, and everybody was in agreement on the board then, we said that we would take every case and do each case individually. Now, I said in the very beginning of this case that the one that should be held responsible, not totally, but partially responsible, is the contractor. That case that we did back in the early days was the same exact thing. It was the contractor. It wasn't?
No, if I remember, I have the case in front of me, so it helps me a little bit easier.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at the case, and it was in 2000. It was our first year. It was a handicapped gentleman. It was a variance in the to allow a side yard setback variance as opposed to the water body setback of 7.5 feet to 4.05. It was an after-the-fact situation. As I recall, he did not have a contractor. He was a contractor himself.
That's right. I'm
And as
sorry.
I also recall, the house went on fire because it only had after-the-fact inspections rather than inspections right from the start. I don't know if that's the reason for the fire, but the house shortly thereafter, the variance basically was terminated as a result of no more structure. About 6 months later, a year later.
I agree that each case is heard independently, or we wouldn't need to have these applicants come every
Right.
time. They would just submit and they say, yeah, I agree, and that's why I vote the way I vote sometimes. Unfortunately, the contractor may be at fault, but this board has no control over that.
I understand that, but we do have control over what gets presented to the board, okay? In other words, and I'm going to use the buildings, for example, okay? Now, one person says, well, I talked to John Dahmer. One person says, I talked to the mayor, blah, blah, blah. It's all hearsay, and that's it, case closed, okay? But it's in black and white, and it's on record, okay? And that should be addressed. Now, are we going to hold one individual responsible, or are we going to go right across the board and hold everybody responsible, equal shares of responsibility? Why just penalize one individual? That's my question, all right? And I think that should be, you know, and it's happened in the past, and I'm sure it's going to happen in the future, but I think that should be somehow addressed.
It was a mix-up to a certain extent, even though the plan is X'd out. I'm a layperson. I come in, I speak to the building department, and the building department tells me X, Y, Z, and we think this may happen. Well, being a layperson, I probably do not understand the exact procedure, so I'm kind of having a little, again, not pointing, please understand, just talking about in general, guys. And I kind of think, well, they said this was going to happen, so did he make a mistake? Absolutely. And I think it was I'm going the wrong way, right, Madam Attorney? Talking.
Let me respond a
wrong
little
thing.
bit from a staff perspective. When we're drafting an ordinance or when we are working on something, a lot of times applicants will come up to me for zoning questions, comp plan questions, whatever it is. What do you think about it? And a long time ago, I came up with this statement, and this is a little vulgar, so I apologize, is that unless I physically do something on the plans, you know, showing how disgusted I am with it, the next person that they see, they're told that Audrey thinks these are wonderful. And they try to pressure staff many times. I don't know about you guys, but I know Chip used to get that quite often. You know, I took it to the city, and the city loves it. It's like the fact that I had a non-committal face meant that I thought it was the greatest thing. So I don't know from, you know, the contractor, I don't know, you know, a lot of times the joke about contractors is, you know, they're not inherently evil or terrible, sorry for saying it this way, but they're optimistic that things will happen. And this might have been one of those situations that in the best alignment on the planets, the optimism, they thought it was worth the risk going forward.
They took the risk.
With
Wait,
this,
that's the- I think
with
that's
this
what I heard.
application, because we spent a lot of time discussing how it proceeded,
I looked at the plans because there was a question from our permit tech as to whether this plan was legal or was violating setback issues. And when I first looked at it, it looked like it was consistent. And I told him that. And the next day he came up to me with the plans and said, well, did you see this portion of the deck that encroaches into the setback? I said, no, I didn't. I said, the way it was drawn, it did not look like that was part of the deck. So we called the contractor, came into the office, explained to him what he could do and what he could not do, what was consistent and what wasn't, and also to explain the plans because we could not definitively see where the edge of the deck was and what portions were going to be attached to the house and what wasn't. So we worked through that situation, and this particular section of the code of the water body setback is one that I've thought needed a little bit of flexibility. So I said, if your client is interested, what we could do is see if there's any interest on the city's part in changing that section of the code to provide a little more flexibility in this area. And he agreed, and I said, well, just so you know, nothing changes until after the effective date of any ordinance. He understood. A couple of months passed from that conversation till I said, we are going forward with a change in the land development code. This is what we are recommending. Just know nothing is official until it is passed and effective. And I do not know whether the council will accept this or whether they will approve it in a modified form. If it is not approved just as you see it in front of you, what you're proposing will not be legal. So there was no lack of clarity on what was being done, what could be permitted, and what could not be permitted. From the very beginning, we had explained to them what they were able to do and what they were not able to do. So the suggestion that there was a lack of clarity or there was confusion, I disagree. There were numerous conversations to make sure that that did not happen. So I feel for this applicant. I understand why he's looking to do what he wants to do, and what he's doing is consistent with what we proposed to the city council. But despite that fact, we cannot turn around and recommend approval to a variance over something that city council deliberately changed just a few months ago. So had this been a situation where this ordinance had been passed 10, 15 years ago, and maybe it was time for an update, that might be a different situation. But this was a proposal that went to the city council for a certain reduction in the setback. City council heard the presentation and accepted a reduction, but less than what was being proposed, which leaves us in this situation. So you have an applicant that decided it was worth the risk to go ahead and build a structure which they had no permit, but thinking that the city council would go ahead and make that modification to the regulations so that they would be consistent. And at that point, they would come in and permit the deck. Unfortunately, in this case, the city council did not accept what was being proposed, and now they're in front of you. So I do understand some of the frustration on the applicant's part, but what I don't understand is a claim of confusion or a claim that they were caught in the middle. This was a deliberate act of construction. The deck did not magically appear. So.
And to follow up on what you're saying, what I heard here is that the applicant was really pushing the contractor to get the job finished.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that word, they took the risk.
Yes, sir.
That Audrey mentioned. They took the risk that it was going to pass. They were going to get the approvals that they needed. So I do put a lot of the blame on the contractor because he's the license holder and he proceeded before he had all the approvals necessary. But I also put the pressure, a lot of the risk on the property owner because it was pretty apparent that he was pushing to get the job done. So.
See, I got to say something, John. You guys do a fantastic job. But a lot of what you just stated, the rhetoric that you had with the contractors, that wasn't put forward. You know what I'm saying? So we're sort of at a loss there, all right? So we're just taking basically his word and the contractor's word, and that's not right either.
When you have items presented to you, what I found is if I had actually said the things I'm told
Yeah,
that I
right.
have said, I would be both very smart and very dumb. And very little of it I've actually said. So when information is presented to you, we try to keep it fact specific. Whether certain things were said, that unless it's directly related to the application itself or to the facts that you need to review, I would much rather keep us from going down that path, because we could spend hours exactly discussing when we met with someone, what was said, how it was interpreted, and how we moved forward. So, yes, sir, it was not included in the presentation, but for the most part, there's a reason for it.
Hindsight, John, and we can't unring the bell, but had this not been, again, Audrey's comment, had this not been an after-the-fact request, would we have looked at that 48 square feet a little different?
I would not have.
You would not have.
And this goes back to the comment that I was making. This was an ordinance that was just recently changed.
Right.
And it was deliberately changed from the city council from a specific reduction that was recommended by the staff to a lesser reduction that the council approved. That fact alone is really what drove this application.
Okay, the 19 feet setback was approved prior to him asking for this variance.
Yes, sir.
Okay. But the only reason he asked for it at this time was because he got caught in the situation. My question, I guess, is had that 25-foot setback still been in effect when he came in and asked for a variance, not a permit, a variance, would we have looked at it differently?
We could have. I think that might have been a different situation.
I know you can't answer that question, John, but
Well, actually, I can tell you that it takes a key piece of the decision-making process out, because there would not have been that recent change.
But also, Mr. Donnelly brought up a good point about design. So had they not come, had they come before us and asked for the variance, we might have offered some or suggested some alternative.
that's all
Yeah.
hindsight. But
There's a number of design things that could have been changed.
For some reason, I thought that whole back deck had to come off. That's why I was trying to get in my head, and then, got down to, 48 feet, and that's. To me,
Yes, sir.
it's
And I don't.
That's-
If I had the property, who's to say I wouldn't want the exact same thing?
Well, what he's done there is he's built something that he can go out of that bedroom and sit and
Yes, sir.
watch the sunset. That's
Yes,
what that's for. That's why that extra 4 feet's there. It's not for egress. He could have
Yes.
egressed off the 6 feet. I understand that.
If we were strictly concerned with ingress and egress, he could have put sliding glass doors.
And his argument about the door, that's a right-handed door from what I see. It was a right-handed, so if he's coming out of the master bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning, that door is not in his way to get out. That door is open to the right. He gets out and goes to the left. I mean, that was, but that was just
Well,
a,
all right, if I can be a little catty. The safety aspect, the fact that he's lived in the house for like 12 years or so, it's a little difficult to think now he suddenly discovers he has
I
an
understand
egress
that,
issue.
I didn't realize that. I
What?
don't think, we didn't, that's knowledge we didn't have.
Yeah, he said that on
he
the,
bought that house 12
He
years
did
ago.
say that, yeah, right.
But I didn't understand that he had been living in it for 12 years.
But anyway, that's, anything else, I mean, for
That's
just-
it.
I just have a quick
I'm sorry.
comment.
All right, so he's got.
Bob mentioned a handicap ramp. So if an application comes before the board and it deals with the Americans with
ADA.
Disabilities Act, that would fall under hardship, would it not?
absolutely, yeah, it depends, but usually for ADA, there's things in the building code and there's substitutions. I mean, it's pretty well set out.
Yeah, it is possible, but just because it is an application that's associated with an ADA standard does not necessarily mean there's a hardship.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
we adjourn again, madam?
Sorry, I kept you people
Okay,
longer.
we're gonna adjourn from our general discussion. Mr. Pastor, and Mr. Brunswick. Okay.
One other thing, I want to thank Mr. Nussbaum for being our chairman for a year, and welcome aboard, Mr. Norris.
Hey, let's hear it.
adjourned. Good job the last 2 years, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, last,
Was that 2 years?